She stepped off the back of a supply truck in the middle of the Nevada desert, carrying a rifle so old the newer Marines didn't even recognize the model. She was 5'4". She weighed maybe 120 pounds. She hadn't slept in 36 hours, and her fatigues had a tear across the left shoulder that nobody had bothered to fix. The men at Fort Blackridge looked at her and laughed. Not behind her back, to her face. Openly. The kind of laughter that assumes it will never have consequences. By the time the sun rose the next morning, 2 enemy scouts were dead at a distance that shouldn't have been possible. The laughter had stopped completely, and Captain Daniel Cross was staring at a tattoo on her wrist that made his hands go cold. If this story already has you gripping your seat, you're exactly where we want you. Hit that subscribe button right now, drop a like, and tell us in the comments what city or country you're watching from. We want to see how far this story travels. Every comment, every like tells us you're out there, and it pushes us to bring you more stories like this one. Don't miss what's coming next. The supply truck came in from the south at 3:30 in the afternoon, trailing a long curtain of red dust that the Nevada wind scattered across the compound before the vehicle even rolled to a stop. Fort Blackridge wasn't much to look at, a hard rectangle of reinforced walls, prefab structures, communication towers, and watch posts carved out of the desert floor, like someone had decided to build a military installation in the worst possible place on purpose. The base sat in the throat of a narrow valley between 2 ridgelines that caught the heat and held it. In summer, it felt like the inside of an engine. In winter, the wind came down off the high ground and cut through everything. It was the kind of posting that career soldiers tried to avoid, and that the brass sent people to when they needed them somewhere, too far from anything to cause trouble. Captain Daniel Cross was standing outside the command post when the truck arrived. He had a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, and a radio handset clipped to his shoulder strap that had been crackling with low-grade interference all morning. He watched the truck slow, watched the dust billow and settle, watched the driver climb out and start unloading supply crates with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had done the same run 100 times and was already thinking about the drive back. Then the passenger door opened, and a woman climbed down from the cab. Cross noticed several things in quick sequence. She was small, noticeably small, even in fatigues, that looked like they'd been worn through at least 2 deployments. Her boots were sixed tight. She carried a rifle case slung over one shoulder and a pack over the other, and she moved with the unhurried economy of someone who had learned long ago not to spend energy on anything that wasn't necessary. She wasn't looking at the truck or the driver or the base entrance. She was already looking at the compound, scanning it. Slow and deliberate, her eyes tracking across the perimeter walls, the guard towers, the gap between the eastern communications bunker and the fuel depot. She was reading the terrain. Cross had seen that look before, on maybe a handful of people in 15 years of service. It was the looks of someone who entered every space by automatically identifying where they'd go if everything went wrong. Behind him, he heard Corporal Reyes say something under his breath. Then Sergeant Holt laughed, and the laugh carried. "That's our new sniper," Holt said, not bothering to lower his voice. "She looks like she got lost on her way to a filing office." A few of the younger Marines standing nearby thought that was funny. Cross didn't turn around. He kept watching the woman. She had heard it. He could tell she had heard it by the way she didn't react at all. Not a muscle in her face shifted, not a pause in her stride. She walked to the base of the guard station, set her pack down without ceremony, and unzipped the rifle case with a practiced motion. The rifle that came out of that case was not what anyone expected. Holt's laugh cut off mid-breath. "What is that?" someone said. It was a bolt action, long, heavy-barreled. The stock was worn and scratched in a way that suggested it had been used extensively rather than neglected. The optics on it were custom, a large objective lens, a turret system that someone had modified from the factory configuration. The weapon looked old because it was old, but the modifications were anything but. Someone had spent serious time and serious money making that rifle do things the original manufacturer never intended. The woman checked the bolt, inspected the chamber, ran her thumb along the barrel in a specific sequence that Cross recognized as a function check rather than an affectation, and then set it down across the case and looked up at him. "Captain Cross? That's me, Mara Voss. I was told to report to you." Her voice was level. Not flat, there was texture in it, something behind the words that she'd learned not to show on the surface. She looked to be mid-30s, maybe younger. Her face had been weathered by outdoor time. Her eyes were a dark, settled gray that gave nothing away. Cross offered his hand and she shook it once, firm, released. "Long drive," he said. 40 miles of unpaved road after the highway. "Suspension on that truck is shot. We put in a request for a replacement 6 months ago." "What happened?" "What always happens." She nodded, like that was an answer she'd expected. Cross glanced at the rifle. "That's a custom build." "Yes." "What's the base platform?" "Modified M40. Rebarreled. Stock replaced. Trigger group rebuilt. It shoots better than it looks." "It looks like it was dragged behind a different truck." Something's almost like a smile passed across her face. Almost. Holt had drifted closer with the studied casualness of someone trying to look like they weren't eavesdropping. He was a big man, loud in the way that some men get when they've been the strongest person in the room for too long. He looked at the rifle, then at Mara, with an expression that made his opinion obvious before he opened his mouth. "What's your confirmed range?" he asked. Mara looked at him, not with hostility, just with the measuring attention of someone deciding how much of an answer he was actually worth. "Depends on conditions. Ballpark. Over a mile. Under 2 ballpark." Holt's jaw shifted. "Nobody shoots under 2 miles consistently." "Nobody I know," she said. "But I don't know everybody." Cross watched Holt's face. The sergeant opened his mouth, closed it, and stepped back. Around them, the younger Marines had gotten quieter. The woman in faded fatigues with the old rifle had just said something that landed harder than a boast would have, because she'd said it like it was a simple statement of fact and then moved on. Cross picked up her pack. "I'll show you where you're bunking." Fort Blackridge had been established as a forward observation and rapid response installation, which was a formal way of saying that its primary purpose was to watch an area that command considered important enough to monitor, but not important enough to send anyone good. The base had 230 personnel Marines, a small Army liaison element, a handful of civilian contractors managing communications infrastructure, and the intelligence section, which was commanded by Colonel Adrian Vale and which occupied the most climate-controlled building on the compound. Cross had been at Blackridge for 8 months. He had stopped asking why they were there after the 3rd month, because the honest answer was that nobody above his pay grade seemed entirely certain, and he had learned that pressing the question got him nothing but a reputation for being difficult. He showed Mara to a bunk in the northeast corner of the personnel quarters, a small room with a cot, a wall locker, and a narrow window that looked toward the eastern ridge. She set her gear down with the practiced efficiency of someone who had unpacked in worse places and would probably do it again. "You eat yet?" Cross asked. "No, mess runs until 2100. The coffee is terrible. Every base I've ever been on, the coffee is terrible. There's a pattern there, somewhere." He stood in the doorway. "Your file says you've done 3 overseas tours, 2 of them in mountainous terrain." She was opening her pack, setting things on the wall locker shelf in a specific order. She didn't stop. "That's what the file says. The file also says you've been out of active duty for 2 years. She paused at that, just for a moment. Then she kept moving. "And yet here I am," she said. "Here you are." Cross leaned against the doorframe. "Anybody brief you on what we're dealing with out here?" "Coalition of independent armed groups. primarily operating out of the Northern Territories. Shifting allegiances. No formal command structure that anyone's been able to map. They hit supply lines, attack isolated outposts, and then pull back into terrain that's difficult to follow them into. That's the polished version. What's the unpolished version? They're well equipped, they know the terrain better than we do, and they've hit 3 adjacent outposts in the past 4 months. Blackridge is next on the pattern. Mara turned and looked at him fully for the first time since they'd entered the room. Who's running their intelligence? We don't know. They're not hitting randomly. No, Cross said. They're not. She turned back to her gear. He waited a moment, watching the back of her head, and then said good night and left her to it. He lay awake that night in his own bunk, thinking about the way she'd read the compound when she stepped off the truck. Thinking about the question she'd asked. Who's running their intelligence? Not do they have intelligence. Not how are they coordinating. She had skipped 4 steps of the standard analysis framework and gone straight to the one question that actually mattered, asked it plainly, and filed away his answer without visible reaction. Cross had been around good soldiers. He'd been around exceptional soldiers. He had seen maybe 3 or 4 people in his career who operated at a level where the word instinct felt inadequate, because what they had wasn't instinct so much as a kind of compressed processing, a way of integrating information so fast that the steps between observation and conclusion disappeared, and they came out somewhere that everyone else took 20 minutes to reach. She was one of those people. He was almost sure of it. What he didn't understand was why she was here. Fort Blackridge was not where you sent someone like that. Fort Blackridge was where you sent people you didn't know what to do with, people you were storing in until a better assignment opened up who had burned bridges, or stepped on the wrong toes, or made enemies of the wrong officers. It was a parking lot at the edge of nowhere, which meant either the assignment was a mistake or someone had sent her here deliberately. He couldn't figure out which option was more concerning. The temperature dropped sharply after midnight. Desert nights in the valleys were savage. The heat that the rock absorbed all day bled out after dark, and the temperature could fall 40 degrees in 3 hours. The watch rotation changed at 2 in the morning, and the Marines who drew the overnight shift worked in layers and still cursed the cold. It was the overnight watch, a young private named Okafor, who first saw the movement on the eastern ridge. He almost dismissed it as animal activity. The ridge was rocky and broken, and things moved on it at night: lizards, desert rats, occasionally a coyote that would sit in the dark and make sounds that played tricks on tired minds. But the movement he saw wasn't animal movement. It was too deliberate, too patient, too aware of the base's arc lights. He called it in. The duty sergeant acknowledged, said he'd look into it, and then spent 4 minutes finishing a conversation before relaying the report up the chain. By the time Cross was notified, the movement on the ridge had resolved into shapes. 2 of them, possibly 3, low to the ground, moving in a pattern that was consistent with observation. Rather than a direct approach, these were scouts, not an assault element. They were mapping something. Position data, guard rotations, fields of fire. Cross pulled on his jacket and stepped outside into the cold. Holt was already at the command post, pulling up the feed from the ridge camera. The image was grainy. The lighting conditions were terrible, and the camera needed maintenance that hadn't been scheduled. Can't get a clear count, Holt said. 2, maybe 3 individuals. They're staying in shadow. Where's Voss? Nobody answered immediately. Cross turned around. The Marines in the command post exchanged a look. Get her, Cross said. Corporal Reyes jogged toward the personnel quarters. He was back in less than 2 minutes. She's not in her bunk, sir. What? Bunk's empty. Gear's there. She's gone. Cross felt something cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. He keyed his radio. Voss, come in. Static. Then quiet and even. I'm here. Where's here? A pause. East Watchtower. 2nd level. I've been here for about 40 minutes. Cross looked at Holt. Holt looked at the feed from the east watchtower camera. It was dark. Whoever was up there had positioned themselves away from the camera's angle. "The ridge," Cross said. "Are you looking at it?" "Yes. We have movement. 2 or 3 individuals, possibly scouts." "3," she said. "Definitely. 3. They've been running a patrol pattern along the upper ridge for the last 22 minutes. Southern Scout is the most exposed. Northern Scout takes a fixed position every 12 minutes, probably photographing the compound. Middle one is coordinating." Cross stared at the grainy camera feed. She had just given him more information in 10 seconds than the base's surveillance system had produced in half an hour. "What's your range to target?" he asked. Another pause. Longer this time. Southern Scout is about 800 meters. The other 2 are further back. Northern one's nearly 1100. Cross did the math. In the dark, in the cold, in unfamiliar terrain, with no spotter. Voss, the rifle cracked. It was a sharp, short sound in the cold air, not the prolonged boom of a larger weapon, but something precise and almost delicate, like a single knuckle rap on a hardwood table. Then silence. Then 12 seconds later, it cracked again. Cross looked at the ridge camera. The shapes that had been moving were no longer moving. Holt said something under his breath that wasn't a word, exactly. The radio hissed. Mara's voice came through flat and factual. "Northern Scout is down. Southern Scout is down. Middle one retreated into the rock formation at bearing 275. I didn't have a clean line." "How far was the Northern Scout?" Cross asked. 1,340 meters. Wind shifted about 4 seconds before I pulled. Had to adjust. A beat. I should have had him in the first shot. I'll recalibrate the optics in the morning. Cross stood in the cold command post for a moment in complete silence. Behind him, he heard Holt exhale a long, slow breath that sounded like someone releasing something they'd been holding without realizing it. She came down from the tower 40 minutes later, after the perimeter had been secured and the base had gone to elevated watch status. She walked through the command post without ceremony, set the rifle case down on the briefing table, and accepted the cup of bad coffee that someone pressed into her hands without looking to see who had offered it. Cross studied her. She didn't look like someone who had just shot 2 people in the dark from over a mile away. She looked like someone who had finished a task and was thinking about the next one. "How long were you up there before we called it in?" he asked. "Since about 0130. "Why?" She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. The heat from it seemed to be what she was, after more than the coffee itself. "The approach routes to this base have 3 natural blind spots," she said. "The Western Canyon, the Northern Wash, and the Upper Eastern Ridge. The ridge is the obvious choice for preliminary scout work because it has the best line of sight to the compound and the most cover. I wanted to see if anyone came to it. And you didn't think to mention this to anyone?" She looked at him. The gray eyes were even in the harsh fluorescent light of the command post. "Would you have let me go out there alone?" Cross didn't answer. The answer was no, and she already knew it. "So you went without asking." "I went where the job needed me to be." She took a sip of the coffee and made a face that suggested the rumors about its quality were accurate. "Those scouts came from the south-southwest, the same bearing as the supply road your truck uses. They already knew which road to avoid. Somebody gave them that information. That's speculation. That's geometry. Their approach angle avoids every sector that would have been active if they came in standard. They weren't guessing. They had data." She set the cup down. "Your base has a leak." The word landed in the command post like a dropped weight. Nobody moved for a moment. Holt, who had been standing against the far wall with his arms crossed and his expression carefully neutral since Mara had come down from the tower, straightened up. "That's a serious accusation," he said. "It's a serious observation." She looked at him without particular emphasis. "I didn't say I knew who it was. I said the geometry doesn't work without it. It could be don't." Her voice was quiet, not sharp, not aggressive. Just clear. Don't tell me it could be coincidence. Coincidence explains one thing. It doesn't explain the angle, the timing, and the specific avoidance of your active patrol sectors simultaneously. Those three things together are a pattern, and patterns have sources. Holt's jaw tightened. He looked at Cross. Cross looked at the map on the briefing table. The supply road, the approach bearing Mara had described. The compound layout. He ran the geometry in his head the way she had described it, and he could not make the coincidence explanation hold. I'll run it up the chain, he said. Carefully, Mara said. He looked at her. If there's a leak, she said, it's inside the base. Running it up the chain means telling someone inside the base. Depending on who it is, you might be handing the information directly to the person you're looking for. The command post was quiet. Outside, the desert wind pressed against the walls. Cross picked up the cold coffee that someone had left for him hours ago and took a sip. It tasted like something had died in the pot. Then what do you suggest? He said. Mara was quiet for a moment. She was looking at the map, but her attention had gone somewhere internal. She was processing something, working through a problem in the space behind her eyes. Keep it small, she said finally. Only people you trust completely. And start watching the people you're not sure about. She glanced up. Who runs intelligence at this base? Colonel Adrian Vale. He commands the intel section. Something happened in her face when he said that name. It was small. It lasted maybe half a second. A tightening around the eyes. A stillness that replaced a stillness that was already there, making something more still than it had been. Then it passed, and her expression settled back into the same even surface. I'd like access to your threat assessment reports, she said. The raw feeds, not the summaries. I want to look at how the enemy's been moving over the past 90 days. I can request them through Vale's section. Do it quietly, she said. And don't tell him what they're for. Cross watched her for a long moment. Then he nodded. She picked up the coffee cup again, stared at it, and put it back down without drinking. Is there any other coffee on this base? She asked. From anywhere else? Reyes keeps a French press in the motor pool, Cross said. He guards it like it's classified. Can you get me access? Cross almost smiled. I'll see what I can do. He didn't sleep after that. He sat in his office with the door closed and the raw threat assessments from the past 3 months spread across his desk. He had requested them quietly through a back channel in the intelligence section that bypassed Vol's personal authorization queue, citing a routine operational review. It was the kind of request that Vale's section processed automatically without flagging. What Cross found in those reports bothered him more than he wanted to admit. The enemy's movement patterns showed a level of operational awareness that went beyond good reconnaissance. 3 times in the past 90 days, hostile elements had avoided positions that Cross's Marines had established but not communicated through official channels. Temporary fighting positions. Informal patrol deviations. Off-book changes to guard rotations that individual sergeants had made without filing updated reports. Small things. The kind of things that didn't make it into official documentation. But the enemy had known about them, which meant the enemy's source wasn't just reading reports. They were watching the base in real time, or they had access to someone who was. Cross sat with that understanding for a while and let it sit heavily. Then he thought about Mara Voss, the way she had been on that tower, before anyone called it in. The way she had looked at the compound when she climbed off the truck. The way she had heard the name Adrian Vale, and for half a second, something had moved behind her eyes. He thought about her file. 3 overseas tours. 2 in mountainous terrain. 2 years out of active service. No listed reason for the gap. No listed reason for the reassignment to Blackridge. The file was clean in the way that files were sometimes clean when someone had gone through them carefully. Cross opened his desk drawer and pulled out a different notebook one he kept separately, not connected to the base's record system. He wrote down a name at the top of a blank page. Then he wrote down a question underneath it. Who sent her here, and why now? He looked at the question for a long moment. Then he wrote a second question beneath it. Why does she react to Vale's name? He closed the notebook, put it back in the drawer, and locked it. Outside his window, the first pale light of dawn was beginning to appear at the edge of the eastern ridge. Somewhere on that ridge, 2 enemy scouts were lying in the cold rock where they had fallen in the dark. 1,340 meters in a crosswind, with a shifting target and no spotter, in the middle of the night. Cross thought about Holt, saying nobody shoots under 2 miles consistently, and about Mara's answer, nobody I know. But I don't know everybody. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a different file. One that wasn't part of the official base record system. One that he had carried with him through 3 postings and never quite found a reason to throw away. Because something in it had always felt unfinished. The file was labeled with a unit designation that had been officially discontinued 5 years earlier. Silver Wolf. He opened it to the page with the operational summary. 12 operators. A covert mission in mountainous terrain. Catastrophic compromise of the operation. The enemy had been waiting for them in a position that should have been unknown. 11 killed in the initial engagement. 1 survivor unaccounted for, presumed dead in the subsequent weeks when no contact was established. The survivor's identity had been redacted in the version of the file Cross had seen. But there was a photograph attached to the operational briefing, a pre-mission team photograph, the kind taken for administrative records, all 12 operators standing in a line. Cross found the photo. He looked at the woman on the right side of the line. She was younger. Her hair was different. The photograph was grainy, and the quality wasn't good. But the eyes were the same. Dark gray, even, already measuring the distance to somewhere that wasn't the camera. Cross put the photograph down on his desk. He thought about the tattoo he had seen on her wrist when she came off the truck, a small black wolf. Simple, no text. The kind of mark you put somewhere permanent when you remember something that hurt. He sat very still for a long time. Then the base alarm sounded. Not the routine watch change tone. The other one, the deep cycling klaxon, that meant something had been detected on approach. Cross was on his feet, and out the door in 4 seconds, his radio already keyed. Report, he said. Holt's voice came back fast and tight. Multiple contacts. Western approach. We're counting vehicle signatures at least 20, possibly more. They're coming fast. Cross ran. Behind him, in the personnel quarters, he could hear boots hitting the floor as Marines pulled on gear. At the edge of his awareness, he registered one other sound. A door, opening and closing quietly. Mara Voss was already moving. He didn't know where she was going. He was starting to understand that she usually knew things before he did, and that the gap between what she understood and what he understood was something he needed to close as fast as possible, because the alarm was cycling and the sun was barely up and 30 vehicles were coming in from the west. And somewhere inside Fort Blackridge, someone had given them the road. The western approach alarm was still cycling when Cross hit the command post door at a dead run. And the first thing he saw was the tactical screen showing vehicle signatures strung out across the desert floor like a broken necklace. 23 contacts, at last count, moving in 2 loose columns, spread wide enough that a single interdiction point wouldn't stop both. The base's perimeter lights had kicked on automatically, washing the outer walls in harsh white that made the darkness beyond them look absolute. Holt was already at the main console, headset on, talking to the watchtowers in clipped bursts. Tower 2, confirm bearing on lead element, say again. Confirm bearing. 270, Sergeant. Due west. Lead vehicle is approximately 4 kilometers out. Copy. Tower 4, you have eyes on the northern column? Affirmative. Looks like a flanking element. Maybe 6 vehicles, trying to use the ridge shadow. Cross pushed up beside Holt and looked at the screen. The pattern was clear once you saw it. The main column was coming straight at the western gate, loud and obvious, while the smaller element swung north, using the terrain to mask their approach. Classic split force pressure. Hit the front, fold the flank, find the seam. They've done this before, Cross said. Hit Outpost Keller 2 months ago, Holt said. Same approach geometry. Where are my heavy weapons teams? Positioning now. Martinez has the 50 cal on the western wall. Delgado's element is moving to the north corner. What about air support? Holt's expression answered that before his words did. Closest aviation asset is 40 minutes out. We put in the call. 40 minutes. Cross did the math against 4 kilometers at the speed those vehicles were moving. They had maybe 12 minutes before the lead element was in direct fire range. He keyed his radio. Voss, where are you? Nothing for 3 seconds. Then, Northern Ridge Access Road, about 200 meters past the outer wire. Cross stared at the radio. You're outside the perimeter? The northern flanking element is going to try to use the dead ground behind the fuel depot ridge to get within RPG range of your generator building. If they get there, they take out your power and your communications at the same time. A pause. I'm not going to let them get there. Voss, I did not authorize. Captain. Her voice was calm in a way that somehow made the radio feel smaller. Do you want to have this conversation now? Or do you want to deal with the 6 vehicles that are 40 seconds from turning your north corner into a kill zone? Cross's hand tightened on the handset. Behind him, Reyes said quietly, Sir, Tower 4 is reporting the northern element is accelerating. Cross let out a breath through his teeth. Voss, he said. You have weapons free. Watch your egress. Copy. The radio went quiet. Cross turned back to the tactical screen and began running the defense he actually had authority over, and tried not to think too hard about the woman who had already put herself outside his wire in the dark with a bolt actionful and apparently no particular concern about any of it. The first shots from the western wall came at 4:17 in the morning, when the lead vehicles pushed to within 800 meters and the Marines on the 50 cal couldn't hold discipline any longer. The sound hit the base like a physical thing, the long, hammering stutter of the heavy gun, tracer rounds arcing out into the dark in bright orange lines that looked almost beautiful from a distance and were anything but up close. The lead vehicle in the main column took a burst across its hood and lurched sideways, blocking the 2 behind it. The columns stalled. It was temporary. Cross knew it was temporary, but a stalled column in the dark was a confused column, and a confused column made mistakes. He pushed his reserve element to reinforce the western wall and watched the tactical screen, waiting for the northern situation to resolve one way or another. It resolved at 4:22. 3 rapid shots, spaced maybe 8 seconds apart. Then the northern flanking column stopped moving. Literally stopped. Every vehicle in it, the lead truck, had rolled sideways into the shallow ditch beside the access road, and the one behind it had braked hard to avoid running into it, and the remaining 4 vehicles had stacked up behind that in a tangle that took away any tactical flexibility they'd had. Cross watched the screen. What happened to the northern element? He said. Reyes was on the surveillance feed, squinting at the grainy footage. Lead vehicle is disabled. Driver's side windshield is gone. Second vehicle it looks like the engine block is hit. They're not moving, sir. Casualties? Can't confirm from here. What did she hit them with? Reyes stopped. He looked at the screen, then at Cross, then back at the screen. She was shooting at the vehicles, not the personnel. The first shot took out the driver. Second shot looks like it went through the hood of the second truck engine kill. Shot, I think she hit the lead truck's fuel line because it's burning now. Cross absorbed that. 3 shots, 3 specific chosen points of impact. She had stopped 6 vehicles without turning it into a massacre. She had disabled the column and created a traffic problem that would take them 10 minutes minimum to resolve, and by that time, the tactical moment they'd been trying to exploit would be gone. Tower 4, Cross said into his radio. Do you have eyes on our shooter's position? Negative, sir. I can hear the shots, but I cannot locate the firing position. Cross thought about what that meant. She was close enough to be effective and invisible enough that a watchtower 200 meters away couldn't find her even while she was firing. He filed that thought away and went back to managing the main assault, which was still pushing against the western wall, with a determination that suggested that whoever who was commanding hadn't yet received word that their flanking move had failed. The main assault broke at 5:03. Not because the Marines had destroyed it. The exchange of fire was ragged and exhausting, and the western wall took 2 vehicle-mounted gun hits that put 3 people down with shrapnel wounds before the enemy pulled back. But the main column needed the flanking element to succeed. Without it, a frontal assault on a reinforced compound was a losing proposition. And whoever was running the enemy's tactical decision-making understood that even if they didn't announce it, the vehicles began pulling back around 5. First the rearmost ones, then the middle, then the battered lid element that had to be tow-roped out of the ditch its lead truck had rolled into. Cross watched them go on the surveillance feed and felt the specific exhaustion of a fight that hadn't been clean or satisfying just done. He had 3 wounded, nothing fatal. The generator building was intact. Communications were up. The northern element was stranded at the edge of the access road, their vehicles disabled, and they had apparently decided that walking into the desert in the dark was preferable to waiting around for the Marines to come check on them, because by the time Cross sent a patrol to the position, the personnel were gone. He tried Mara's radio at 5:15. Voss. Assault has withdrawn. You can come in. On my way. She came through the north gate at 5:32, her rifle case over one shoulder and her pack over the other, walking with the same unhurried economy she'd shown when she stepped off the supply truck the previous afternoon. There was dust on her fatigues and a small cut on the back of her right hand that she hadn't done anything about, dried blood tracking down toward her knuckle. She walked straight to the command post, set her rifle down, and looked at the tactical screen. The northern group had a spotter, she said. He was positioned on the high ground above the access road, coordinating by radio. I could hear the transmissions, but I couldn't get a clean line on the position. Did you stop the vehicles first and then look for the spotter? Or first vehicle was the priority? The spotter was secondary once the column was stopped. She traced a line on the map with one finger the access road, the ridge above it, the fuel depot behind the compound wall. He was calling corrections. If I'd missed the lead truck, he would have redirected the whole element to the secondary approach. You didn't miss. No. She didn't say it with any particular pride. It was just a statement of what had happened. The third shot was harder than the first 2. I had to hold off the vehicle and wait for it to stop moving, and by then the light was changing. Dawn comes fast out here. Cross looked at her hand. You need to get that looked at. She glanced at it like she'd forgotten it existed. It's nothing. Caught the wire coming back through the perimeter. Medic. Now. That's not a request. She looked at him for a moment with an expression that wasn't quite annoyance, more like someone recalibrating their assessment of a situation they thought they'd already figured out. Then she picked up her rifle and left to find the medic, and Cross turned back to the map. Holt appeared beside him with 2 cups of coffee. He set one down without speaking. Cross picked it up. She was outside the wire, Holt said. Without authorization. I know. That's a serious. I know. Holt, a silence. Holt drank his coffee. On the tactical screen, the enemy vehicle signatures had dissolved back into the desert. 3 shots, Holt said finally. Northern element. What are we looking at, range-wise? Reyes put it between 600 and 900 meters. Dark conditions, moving targets, no spotter. Holt was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I want to know where she's been for the last 2 years. So do I, Cross said. The debrief happened at 0700 in the main briefing room with the overhead lights too bright and everyone running on the wrong side of a night without sleep. Cross ran it himself. The section commanders were there: Holt, the logistics officer, Captain Farron, the communications chief, Lieutenant Becker, and Colonel Vale, who arrived 4 minutes late in a pressed uniform that suggested he had managed to sleep through at least part of the assault. Vale was a tall man in his mid-50s, silver-haired, with the deliberate manner of someone who had learned to make slowness look like authority. He had been running intelligence at Blackridge for 11 months. His briefings were thorough and precisely formatted and contained in Cross's private assessment, considerably less actual intelligence than their length implied. Mara sat in the back of the room. She had changed her fatigues, gotten the cut on her hand wrapped, and found a chair against the far wall where she could see the door and both windows simultaneously. Cross had noticed that she always sat that way back to something solid, sight lines clear. Vale noticed her when he came in. His eyes moved to her, registered her presence, and moved away. Fast, the kind of thing you wouldn't catch if you weren't already watching for it. Cross caught it. He filed it away and started the debrief. The main points were covered quickly: enemy strength, approach vectors, timeline of contact, weapon systems employed, casualties on both sides. Vale took notes on a small pad in handwriting, too small for anyone else to read. He asked 3 questions during the debrief, all of them procedural, none of them about the intelligence picture. When Cross opened the floor, Mara spoke from the back of the room. The main column came in from due west, she said. The northern flanking element approached from 295 magnetic. Both approach vectors avoid the primary surveillance sectors. She had a map in front of her, and she tapped 2 points on it. These are the only 2 approach angles to this base that aren't covered by the standard camera rotation. The camera system cycles every 45 seconds. These 2 windows fall between cycles. The room went quiet. "How do you know the camera rotation?" Farron asked. "I counted it last night before the assault started." Farron stopped. "You were timing our camera rotation while the assault was incoming?" "I was timing it when I went up to the East Tower. I thought it was worth knowing." "The point," Cross said, "is that those 2 approach vectors. How would the attacking force know about them?" "They either conducted extensive reconnaissance over multiple days," Mara said, "or they had the information given to them. The reconnaissance explanation is possible. The base has been active for over a year. Patient observers could map the camera rotation. But the flanking move was too precise. The northern element knew the exact moment the northern sector camera went into its sweep. They timed their acceleration to hit the dead zone. That level of precision requires a known quantity, not an estimate." Vale set down his pen. "That's an interesting theory," he said. His voice was smooth and careful. Mara looked at him. Just looked. She didn't say anything for a moment, and the silence had a texture to it. "It's not a theory," she said. "It's a timing analysis. The numbers are in the surveillance log. Anyone can check them." "We don't know that the enemy timed their approach to our camera system," Vale said. "We know they approached from 2 vectors that happened to fall in surveillance gaps. That could be good terrain analysis on their part. Both gaps, simultaneously coordinated? Possible." "Simultaneously," she repeated, timed to the second. Vale's expression didn't change. He was very good at that, at maintaining a surface that gave nothing away, the practiced blankness of someone who had spent a long time learning to control their face. But his right hand, which had been resting on the table beside his notepad, had moved. Just slightly. He had shifted it inward, closer to his body, in the unconscious contraction of someone absorbing something they don't like. Cross saw it. He didn't look at Vale directly, but he saw it. "We'll continue reviewing the surveillance data," Cross said. "Vale, I want your section to pull the approach vector analysis from the last months and cross-reference it with the camera rotation schedule, going back to base establishment." Vale looked at him. "That's a significant data pull," he said. "It is. It will take time. Start today." A moment of stillness between them. Then Vale nodded, picked up his notepad, and the debrief moved on. Cross found Mara at the East Tower an hour after the debrief, cleaning her rifle with the methodical attention of someone for whom the task was also a thinking exercise. She had the bolt removed, the barrel pointed at the light, and she was running a patch through it with even, unhurried strokes. Cross climbed the tower stairs and sat down on a crate across from her. Vale, he said. She kept cleaning the rifle. The patch came out dark with carbon, and she reached for a clean one. What about him? You know who he is. The cleaning stopped. Not dramatically, just a pause between one stroke and the next. Then it continued. He runs your intelligence section, she said. Mara. Another pause, this one longer. She set the cleaning rod down and looked up at him with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a specific conversation and has already decided how to handle it. What's in the file? She asked. Silver Wolf. Nothing moved in her face. But something moved behind her eyes, something old and heavy, like something being shifted that had been sitting in one place for a very long time. Where did you get it? I've had it for 3 years. It came to me through a back channel when I was at my previous posting. Someone sent it to me without explanation, and I never found out who. She looked at him for a long moment. The desert wind moved through the tower's open sides and lifted the edge of the map. She had spread on the crate beside her. What do you want to know? She said. What happened? She was quiet. Outside the tower, someone was shouting coordinates across the compound, a normal operational voice, nothing urgent. The base was running its morning routine with the particular focused energy that comes after a night that could have gone worse. We were set up, she said, Silver Wolf, the operation. We were given a target and a timeline and an insertion route, and the enemy was waiting for us at every point. They knew our route, our timing, our team composition, our communication frequencies. They knew everything. She picked up the cleaning rod again, turned it in her fingers without using it. We took contact in the first valley. Lost 4 people in the first 2 minutes. The team leader tried to pull us back to the extraction point, but the extraction point was compromised too. A pause. I was the last one out. I made it to the emergency cache site. Nobody else did. And afterward? Afterward, the official report said the operation failed due to faulty intelligence and poor field decisions. The team leader, a man named Garrett Webb, was cited for command errors. He was dead, so he couldn't respond to that. Something moved through her voice, not quite bitterness, harder than that. His family got the report. They spent 2 years thinking he died because he made bad choices. Cross sat with that. And the source of the compromise? He said. The leak inside the operation? She looked at the cleaning rod in her fingers. I have an idea, she said. I've had it for 5 years. But an idea isn't evidence, and the person I think was responsible is still active, still trusted, still in a position to do it again. Cross thought about Vale's hand, moving on the table, the careful, smooth voice, the way his eyes had moved to Mara when he walked in and moved away again, too fast, covering something. Is that why you're here? Cross said. At Blackridge specifically? She didn't answer that. The non-answer was itself an answer, and they both knew it. If Vale is the leak, Cross said carefully, and he recognizes you. He already does. The certainty in her voice settled over the conversation, like something cold. He made me the second I walked through the gate, she said. I saw it. Controlled his reaction better than most people would, but I've been watching for it for 5 years. I know what it looks like. Then you're in danger. I was in danger when I got on the truck. She said it without self-pity. Just fact. But if I leave, this ends. He stays in position, he keeps feeding information, and the next time those vehicles come, they come better prepared and with better timing, and this base takes real casualties. Mara, I need evidence, she said. Something documented, something that ties what happened 5 years ago to what's happening here now. Without that, it's the word of a woman who officially doesn't exist against a full colonel with 11 months of clean performance reviews. Cross turned that over. She was right. He knew she was right. The evidence problem was the whole problem. It had always been the whole problem with things like this. The people who were good at this kind of betrayal were good at it. Precisely, they left very little behind that could be directly lined, that could be directly tied to them. What do you need? He said. Access to the raw signal intercepts from the 48 hours before last night's assault. Not the processed summaries, the raw traffic. If Vale was passing information to the attacking force, it went through some kind of communication channel, and that channel left traces. Vale controls the intelligence section. He controls access to that data. You're the base commander. He outranks me. You have operational authority over base security. Cross thought about that. It was a fine line. It was probably fine enough to walk, at least for a little while, before Vale noticed and pushed back through his own channels. Give me an hour, Cross said. He climbed down the tower stairs and walked across the compound toward the communications building, and he did not look toward the intelligence section headquarters, because he knew that if Vale was watching, and Vale was almost certainly watching, an obvious tell right now would cost them everything. The signal intercepts took him 90 minutes to access, not an hour, because the communications chief Becker had a procedural question that Cross had to answer carefully before Becker would release the raw files without running the request through the standard authorization chain. Cross told him it was a routine security audit, and Becker, who was young and conscientious and had been at Blackridge for only 4 months, accepted that and handed over the files. Cross brought them to Mara on a secure tablet. She sat with it for 2 hours while the base ran its afternoon maintenance cycle around her. People moving past the tower with equipment and supply crates and the normal business of a compound that had taken a hit the previous night and was resetting for whatever came next. She didn't say anything for most of that 2 hours. She scrolled. She stopped occasionally and stared at something, then scrolled back, then forward. Cross watched her without watching her. He sat nearby with his own paperwork and let her work, checking on her every 20 minutes with a glance. At the 90-minute mark, she stopped scrolling entirely. She stared at the screen for a long time. Cross set down his paperwork. What is it? She turned the tablet so he could see it. On the screen was a section of radio traffic log, raw signal data, time-stamped with frequency markers. This transmission, she said, pointing to an entry. 41 hours before the assault began. Short burst, encrypted, sent from inside the base's communication perimeter. We send encrypted traffic all the time. Not on this frequency. This frequency is not part of Blackridge's allocated spectrum. It's in a band that the base's own communication system doesn't use, which means it didn't go through the base communication infrastructure. It went through a separate personal device. Cross looked at the frequency marker. He was not a communication specialist, but understood enough to see what she was describing. Someone sent a transmission from inside this base, he said slowly, using equipment that isn't part of our system. 41 hours before the assault, and then, again she scrolled forward. Here, 18 hours before. Short burst, same frequency, same encryption signature. Can you decode it? Not with what I have here. But I don't need to decode it. She tapped the timestamps. The timing corresponds to the operational planning window for a mobile assault of this scale. First transmission is when you decide you're going to attack. Second transmission is final confirmation and timing details. Cross stared at the screen. The data was there, clear and time-stamped, sitting in a log that should have been reviewed as a matter of routine, and hadn't been because the person responsible for reviewing it was the person responsible for the transmissions. This is traceable, Cross said. To a device, yes. To a specific device location within the base, yes. The signal strength and the angle of propagation narrow it to a specific sector of the compound. She looked at him. The intelligence section building. Cross put the tablet down on the crate beside him. He sat with his hands on his knees and looked at the desert through the tower's open side. The afternoon light was hard and flat, and the ridge lines shimmered in the heat. "If I take this to command," he said, "it goes through channels that Vale has access to." "Yes. If I move against him without command authorization, I'm exposing myself." "Yes. And if we do nothing?" "The next assault is already being planned," she said. Based on the transmission pattern, the gap between the first and second contact was 41 hours and 18 hours respectively. Confirmation. Confirmation came close to the event. If the pattern holds, the next attack will happen within 72 hours of them deciding to do it. She paused. And they'll come better prepared this time, because the flanking move didn't work. Cross thought about the 3 Marines in the medical bay with shrapnel wounds. He thought about the 11 names in the Silver Wolf operational summary. "I need something more," he said. "The transmissions are strong circumstantial evidence." But Vale's going to dispute the location data. He's going to say the signal could have originated from multiple points in that sector. "I need something that puts him personally at the source." "I know. Do you have a way to get it?" She looked at the tablet in her hands. Then she looked out at the ridge lines. "There's a way," she said. "But it requires doing something that's going to make him move. Once he moves, it gets harder to control. What is it?" She was quiet for a moment. "I need to let him know I have this," she said, holding up the tablet. Not explicitly, but enough that he understands the situation has changed. That I'm not just a random reassignment anymore, that I found something. If you do that, he'll come for you. I know. He's already tried to have you killed once, 5 years ago. She met his eyes. Something settled in her expression, not resignation, not recklessness. Something clearer than either of those things. "Then he already knows it didn't work," she said. The wind moved through the tower again, hot and dry, carrying the smell of dust and diesel and the particular metallic tang of a base that had been shooting recently. Cross picked up his radio. "Reyes," he said, "I need you to find something for me, and I need you to be quiet about it. Pull the access logs for the intelligence section, building, for the last 72 hours. Every entry, every exit. Time-stamped. Sir, those go through Colonel Vale's admin queue." "I know. Pull them anyway. Tell Becker it's a security audit continuation. Don't put it in writing." A pause. "Copy, sir." Cross set the radio down and looked at Mara. She had already psychologically, professionally, she had already turned back to the tablet, scrolling forward through the transmission log with the focused attention of someone looking for the next thing they already knew was there. "Get some rest," he said. She didn't look up. "When it's done," she said. The access logs came back at 1914, and Reyes delivered them in person rather than over radio, which told Cross that the corporal had understood, without being told explicitly, that this was not something to put on a channel that other people might be monitoring. Cross looked at the logs in the fading light of the command post. Reyes stood nearby, not quite at attention, but close to it, the posture of someone waiting to find out if what they'd brought back was going to make things better or worse. The intelligence section building had logged 12 entries and exits in the 72-hour window Cross had requested. 9 of them were routine staff analysts, coming in during normal duty hours, leaving at the end of shift, 1 late-night return that corresponded to the overnight threat assessment that Vale's section produced every 72 hours. Cross went through them methodically. The 10th entry was Vale, at 23:40 the night before the assault. He had stayed for 31 minutes. The 11th was Vale again, at 20 after the assault alarm had sounded, but before Cross had reached the command post. He had stayed for 11 minutes. The 12th was the one that stopped Cross entirely. It was an exit with no corresponding entry. Someone had left the building through the side door a secondary exit that was logged by a sensor rather than a keypad at a time that didn't match any of the entry records. The sensor log showed the door opening for approximately 4 seconds. The timestamp was 0147. 0147. 11 minutes before the assault alarm went active. Cross set the log down and looked at Reyes. Do the entry logs for that side door have a camera? No, sir. There's a camera on the main entrance only. Who knows about the side door sensor? That it logs exits? Reyes thought about it. The communications chief would know, because he maintains the sensor network. The base security officer. Colonel Vale's admin staff, because they manage the building. Not general knowledge. No, sir. Most people don't know it logs at all. It's a fire egress sensor. It's in the facility maintenance manual, not the security brief. Cross folded the log and put it in his jacket pocket. This conversation didn't happen. Understood, sir. After Reyes left, Cross sat in the command post alone for several minutes. The base had gone to a watchful quiet, the kind that followed a hard night, where everyone was moving at three-quarter speed, and the noise level was lower than normal, and the conversations that did happen were short and functional. Through the command post window, he could see the western wall where the 50 cal was still mounted. Martinez running a cleaning cycle on it with the unhurried motion of someone who expected to use it again soon. He took the log out of his pocket and looked at the side door timestamp again. 0147. The assault alarm went active at 0158. 11 minutes later, someone had left the intelligence section, building 11 minutes before the assault alarm. Not because the alarm woke them up. Before it. Cross thought about that for a long time. Then he went to find Mara. She was at the East Tower again. He was beginning to understand that the East Tower was where she went to think, probably because it had the best sightlines and the least foot traffic, and the wind-up there carried sound away from the base rather than toward it. She was not cleaning the rifle this time. She was sitting with her back against the tower wall, her knees up, watching the Ridgeland run through the scope of the rifle without it being shouldered, just holding the optic up to one eye the way someone else might look through a pair of binoculars. Cross climbed up and sat across from her and handed her the log. She read it. She read it twice, which meant the first reading hadn't satisfied her about something. The side door, she said, no camera. He knew that. Almost certainly. She handed the log back. She had gone very still in the way that he had started to recognize as her processing mode, not blank, not absent, but fully interior, working through something with all of her attention turned inward. He left the building 11 minutes before the alarm, she said. Yes. Where did he go? I don't know. There are no cameras on the east side of that building. 11 minutes. She was still looking at the ridgeline through the scope, but she wasn't seeing it anymore. Long enough to do one thing. Short enough that it had to be something already prepared. She lowered the scope. A transmission. A final confirmation. He walked out of that building, sent the signal, and walked back in so that when the alarm went off, he was inside, and his presence there had a legitimate explanation. Can we prove that? The transmission logs show an outbound burst at 0151 on the same non-standard frequency. 4 minutes after, he walked out. She said it without inflection, like she was reading a maintenance report. I found it while you were getting the access logs. I didn't mention it because I wanted to see if the building data matched. Cross stared at her. You already had it. I had the transmission. I needed the corroborating location data. Now I have both. She set the scope down beside her. It's still not enough. He didn't argue that, because she was right. What they had was a chain of circumstantial evidence transmissions on an unauthorized frequency from within a specific sector of the base, and a building exit that corresponded to within minutes of one of those transmissions. It was compelling. It was not proof. A good lawyer or a colonel with 11 months of clean reviews and institutional connections could put enough distance between those data points to make the chain look like coincidence, and the burden of proof in a case against a senior officer would be high enough that coincidence might be sufficient. I need to know what was in those transmissions, Cross said. So do I. And I know someone who can decode them, but they're not on this base. Who? She was quiet for a moment. Someone I trust. Outside the chain of command. Former intelligence signals specialist. She looked at him. If I send the raw data to them, it's going through a channel that bypasses this base's communication system. Unofficially. Cross thought about what that meant for him personally. Using unofficial channels to route classified adjacent data to a civilian contact was the kind of thing that ended careers, even when it was the right call, and especially when it wasn't. Do it, he said. She looked at him with something that wasn't quite surprise, but was adjacent to it, the expression of someone recalibrating a prior assessment. You're sure? No, Cross said. Do it anyway. The second assault came 31 hours later, and it came differently. The first assault had been a probe aggressive, but probing nonetheless, designed to test the base's response time, identify weak points, and confirm the intelligence picture. Cross understood that now. The first assault had been information gathering as much as it was an actual attack, and the information it had gathered was now in the hands of whoever was planning the second one. The warning came at 22:15 from a patrol that Mara had quietly suggested Cross run along a specific route, a loop that went out to the northern wash and came back through the high ground above the access road, covering terrain that the base's standard patrol pattern missed. She hadn't framed it as her suggestion. She had asked Cross, during a routine conversation about patrol scheduling, whether anyone was running that particular route. He had said no. She had suggested it might be worth adding. He had added it. The patrol found tripwires at the edge of the northern wash. Not explosive tripwires. Sensor tripwires, thin line connected to a small radio transmitter. The kind used to monitor approaches without committing personnel to a fixed observation position. Someone had placed them in the past 24 hours, which meant someone had been in that terrain without detection. Cross got the report at 22:15 and immediately understood what it meant. The enemy wasn't coming from the west this time. They were coming from the north, using the wash as a staging area, and the tripwires were there to tell them when the patrol patterns had cleared. He put the base on alert and started repositioning. Then things started going wrong. The first thing that went wrong was the radio. The primary command frequency, the one that Cross used to talk to all section commanders, simultaneously developed an interference at 2241. Not complete failure, partial degradation. Enough that transmissions had to be repeated, that some messages didn't get through at all, that the base's coordinations slowed from a functional machine to something grinding and unreliable. Becker worked on it. He couldn't find the source of the interference. The signal was coming from inside the base's communication perimeter, but the diagnostic equipment kept pointing to different locations, as if the source was moving or cycling. It's deliberate, Mara said, appearing at Becker's shoulder in the communications building. She had the tablet with the signal intercepts in her hand, and she pulled up a frequency display. Here, they're running a cyclic jammer on a frequency adjacent to your command net. It drifts, so the diagnostic reads, keep chasing it. Becker looked at the display. Where's it coming from? I need your directional antenna. Becker pointed to the equipment locker. She had it out in 90 seconds and was running a triangulation before anyone had finished, asking the next question. Cross watched her hands on the equipment. She moved through the technical process with the confidence of someone who had done it before, not recently, but thoroughly, enough that the muscle memory was still there. North-northeast, she said, inside the base. Approximately, she paused, adjusted the antenna, read the bearing again. The fuel depot area. Cross keyed his radio. It crackled but held. Perimeter team, I need a physical sweep of the fuel depot perimeter. Now, copy, sir. What are we looking for? Small radio device. Battery powered. Could be attached to the exterior of any structure. Hidden in equipment. Anywhere with line of sight north. Copy. Mara handed the directional antenna back to Becker. Get your backup frequency operational, she told him. Whatever frequency is listed in your emergency communication protocol. Don't announce the switch on the primary net. Becker looked at Cross. Do it, Cross said. The sweep of the fuel depot found the jammer 4 minutes later, a small device no bigger than a brick, taped to the back of a drainage pipe on the fuel depot's eastern wall, exactly where the directional antenna had pointed. The Marine who found it photographed it in place, before removing it, which Cross had specifically ordered. The command net came back up, clean at 22:59. 16 minutes later, the northern approach alarm activated. They came through the wash in 3 elements. Not vehicles, this time on foot, which meant they'd learned something from the previous night. Vehicles were loud and visible and stoppable. Dismounted fighters in the dark were a different problem. They were harder to see, harder to fix with heavy weapons, and harder to stop at range without sustained fire that risked burning through ammunition faster than it could be resupplied. The northern element crossed the wash in a line and moved toward the outer wire, with a discipline that told Cross these were not the same fighters who'd driven trucks at his western wall the night before. These were trained. He had repositioned Holt's element to the north wall based on the tripwire warning. That repositioning saved them from the first contact being a complete disaster, because Holt's people were in position when the northern element tried to breach the wire, and the initial exchange of fire, while brutal, was two-sided rather than one-sided. Cross ran the defense from the command post, watching the contact reports build on the tactical screen, pushing reserves to the right places, managing the ammunition picture, keeping track of his casualties. 2 wounded in the first 3 minutes, then a third. Then the radio brought him Holt's voice, tight but controlled. They're probing the northeast corner. Looks like a secondary element, trying to find the seam between my position and the eastern wall. Can you cover it? Stretched. I need someone on the east wall to extend their line. Cross redirected a reserve team. The northeast corner held. Then the mortar round started. They came from outside the wire. From a position somewhere north-northwest that the base's counterfire team hadn't yet located. The first rounds landed in the open area between the barracks and the motor pool, close enough to be alarming. Far enough that the first 2 impacts didn't hit anything critical. The third round landed on the roof of the medical building, and the fourth hit the open ground beside the generator housing. The 5th round hit the east wall. The blast took out a section of the parapet and dropped 2 Marines from the fighting position on top of it. Both of them were alive. Cross confirmed that immediately, got them to the medic, but the position was now unmanned, and the gap it left in the eastern wall coverage was visible. Cross saw it on the tactical screen. He was already reaching for his radio when he heard the shot. One shot. From somewhere north of the east wall. High and sharp, the sound of Mara's rifle was by now something he could identify, separate from everything else happening. Then another. Then a third, in quick succession, faster than the deliberate spacing she'd used at distance the night before. These were close shots, compensating for speed rather than range. The mortar fire stopped, not gradually. Stopped, mid-sequence between rounds, as if someone had simply turned it off. Cross got on the radio. Voss, report. 15 seconds of nothing. Then her voice came through, slightly uneven, in a way he hadn't heard before. Mortar team is neutralized. 3 personnel. I'm a pause. I'm at the northeast corner. I need a moment. The unevenness in her voice made Cross's chest tighten. Are you hit? No. Then after a half second, not seriously. He sent the medic anyway. She had taken a round across the left side, not a direct hit, a fragment, something that had come off the wall when the mortar struck and cut a 4-inch line through her fatigues and the skin beneath them. The medic found her sitting against the interior base of the east wall, rifle across her lap, pressing her hand against her side with the businesslike focus of someone who has assessed an injury and decided it falls below the threshold of immediate alarm. The medic wanted to take her to the medical building. She said no. They had an argument about it that Cross arrived to hear the tail end of, medic insisting with the professional frustration of someone whose expertise is being ignored. Mara telling him she needed 2 minutes and a field dressing, and she'd come to the medical building when the perimeter was secured. Give her the dressing, Cross said. The medic gave him a look that expressed several things without using words, and then complied. Mara stood up while the medic was still applying tape and looked at the tactical picture through the gap in the east wall parapet. The northern assault was pulling back without the mortar fire. The dismounted element had lost its suppression cover, and Holt's people were pushing them away from the wire with disciplined fire. They'll regroup, she said. They didn't commit everything to that push. This was a second probe. I know, the mortar team was carrying a radio. They were in communication with someone. Cross looked at her. She was pale in the harsh light from the perimeter floods, the field dressing bright white against the dark of her fatigues, and she was still putting analysis together while a medic finished taping a wound to her side. In communication with someone where, he said, inside the base. She met his eyes. The mortar fire stopped adjusting the moment I moved. I was moving. They were tracking me. You're saying someone was watching you from inside the bases and correcting the mortar team's fire. I'm saying the mortar team made 4 corrections, ins, the first 5 minutes, and then went completely still for 90 seconds before I reached the northeast corner, and then started firing again the moment I got into an exposed position. She reached up and took the last piece of tape from the medic's hand and pressed it herself. That's not coincidence. That's targeting data. Cross stood very still. The implication was clear and terrible. Not just a communication, like an active observer inside the base, watching real-time, feeding position data to a weapons team that was trying to kill a specific person. Not the base. Her. The mortar team had been targeting her. Where were you positioned before the northeast corner? He said. It was East Tower, upper level, for about 20 minutes before the assault started. And before that, command post approach. I came from the communications building. He thought about who could have seen that, who would have had eyes on her movements without it looking suspicious. I need you out of sight, he said, right now. I need to... Mara, he said it with a flatness that stopped her. Someone in this base is directing weapons fire at your specific location in real time. Every second you're visible and predictable, you're a target. I need you somewhere nobody knows you are. She looked at him for a moment with the measuring attention she applied to everything, running the calculation. Then she nodded once. The maintenance corridor under the East Barracks, she said. Nobody goes there at night. I'll have radio. Don't use the primary net. Use the backup frequency Becker set up. Copy. She moved. The medic watched her go with an expression of someone who had given up on the concept of patient compliance. Cross turned back to the tactical screen and began managing what was left of the assault. But part of his attention had split off and was running a different problem in parallel, going through the list of people who had been in a position to watch Mara's movements for the past 45 minutes, narrowing it, weighing it against what he already knew. The list was not long. The assault ended at 01:17, the northern element withdrawing through the wash in the same organized way they'd arrived, not routed, just done. They'd probed the perimeter, established response patterns, and left. Cross counted his casualties, 6 wounded, none fatal. The east wall section needed repair. 2 vehicles in the motor pool had taken shrapnel. The medical building roof was a problem. He spent 40 minutes on post-assault coordination casualty reports, ammunition resupply, perimeter security, the dozen small urgent things that accumulated after contact. Then he handed the active management to Holt and went to find Vale. Vale was in the intelligence section building. Cross had not announced that he was coming. He walked in through the main entrance at 02:05, past the duty analyst who stood up from his chair and opened his mouth, and Cross told him to sit down and went to Vale's office in the back. Vale was at his desk. He was dressed in full uniform. Which at 2 in the morning after an assault meant either he had been working through it or he had never gone to sleep. A tactical map was open on his desk with handwritten notations on the overlay. He looked up when Cross came in with the expression of a man who had expected this visit and had decided how to handle it. "Captain," he said, "good timing. I was about to request a coordination meeting." "I want your position log for the last 90 minutes, Cross said. Vale's expression didn't change. "I was here, working." "The duty analyst can confirm that?" He was in and out. "I've been running the threat assessment update." "In and out," Cross repeated. "Where did he go when he was out?" "Coffee, restroom." "I don't track my analyst's movements in that level of detail." Cross pulled out the jammer that his perimeter team had recovered from the fuel depot and set it on Vale's desk. He set it down quietly, without drama, and watched Vale's face. Vale looked at it. His expression remained professionally neutral. Something happened in his eyes, a very brief recalibration. The look of someone adjusting a plan, and then it was gone. "Where was this found?" he said. "Fuel depot east wall." "It was causing the primary net interference." "Good. I'll have my section run a technical analysis to determine origin." "I'll handle the technical analysis." Vale looked up from the jammer. The professional neutrality was still there, but something behind it had gone harder. "Captain, this falls within my sections." "Colonel," Cross kept his voice even. "Someone was directing mortar fire tonight at a specific individual inside this base. The mortar team's adjustments tracked that individual's movements in real time. I want to know who was watching her and how they were communicating with a weapons team, teams outside the wire." The silence in the office was the specific quality of silence that exists when two people who know the same secret are in the same room, and one of them has just confirmed it to the other without saying it directly. Vale's hands were flat on the desk, still, controlled. "That's a significant accusation," he said. "I haven't accused anyone of anything," Cross said. "I've described an operational event and said I want to know how it happened. The implication is clear. I'm glad we understand each other." Cross reached out and picked up the jammer. "I'll need your section's communication logs for the last 72 hours. Full raw feed, not processed summaries. I want them on a secure drive in my office by 0600. Vale sat back in his chair, a small movement, just enough to create a fraction of distance. "I'll need to verify the authorization for that request." "Operational security review." "Base commander's authority." "My section reports to." "I know who your section reports to." "I also know that base operational security is under my authority and that a communication breach during an active assault qualifies as an immediate security matter." Cross held his eyes. 0600, Colonel." He turned and walked out before Vale could respond. He did not walk fast. Walking fast would look like he was running from something. He walked at the same pass he'd come in at, past the duty analyst, who was very carefully looking at his screen and not at the departing base commander, and out through the main entrance into the night air. Outside, Cross stood still for a moment and breathed. His hands were steady, which he was glad about, because they had not felt steady during that conversation. He had just told a man he suspected of active enemy collaboration that he was under scrutiny, and he had done it deliberately. The reason he had done it deliberately was because Mara had said, "I need to let him know I found something." And he had understood what she meant. She was forcing Vale to move. A man who felt secure would wait and manage the situation carefully. A man who felt exposed would act, and an action was evidence in a way that stillness was not. The question was what form the action would take, and how fast. Cross walked back toward the command post, watching the compound around him with the new layer of attention that the past 48 hours had added to everything, every dark corner, every building entrance, every position from which a person inside the base could watch another person's movements without it looking like watching. He keyed his radio to the backup frequency. Voss. A pause, then quiet from the maintenance corridor under the East Barracks. "Here. He knows we're looking," Cross said. "Watch yourself tonight." Another pause. Longer. How did he take it? Carefully, Cross said. He's smart. He's not going to panic. No, she said. He won't panic. But he's going to make a decision before 0600, and once he makes it, he won't go back. The radio was quiet for a moment. In the distance, Cross could hear the perimeter teams running their post-assault checks, voices low and functional in the dark. What do you think he decides? Cross asked. He wasn't sure she would answer that. She did. He decides I need to be dead before the logs reach you, she said. He's been making that decision for 5 years. Tonight just gives him a deadline. The radio clicked off. Cross stood in the compound with the cool night air on his face, and the jammer device in his hand, and the sound of his base running its recovery operations around him. And he thought about the woman in the maintenance corridor, and the man, Andori, and the man in the intelligence section building, and the 11 minutes between an unauthorized exit and an assault alarm. And he felt, with the particular clarity that comes from a problem that has finally assembled itself into a visible shape, that the next few hours were going to determine everything. He went back to the command post and did not sleep. Kept one eye on the intelligence section and kept one end section building's front entrance through the window and waited to see what Adrian Vale was going to do. He didn't have to wait long. At 0344, the backup frequency crackled. Mara's voice came through, and this time the evenness in it was gone entirely, replaced by something clipped and precise. The voice of someone who has moved from analysis into action. Cross, she said. Someone just came through the maintenance access panel above me. Cross was on his feet before she finished the sentence. Armed, suppressed rifle. He's moving toward the east end of the corridor. Get out now. A burst of static. Then quieter, he's between me and the exit. Cross grabbed his sidearm and ran. Cross covered the distance between the command post and the east barracks in 40 seconds, which was fast but not fast enough that he wasn't thinking while he ran. The maintenance corridor ran beneath the length of the east barracks, a low utility space used for pipe access and electrical routing, not a place anyone went intentionally. There were 2 entry points, a hatch at the north end, accessed from outside, and an internal panel at the south end that opened from a supply closet inside the barracks building itself. He went for the south end. The supply closet door was unlocked, which it shouldn't have been, and the access panel in the floor was sitting at a 5-degree angle, not fully open, not fully closed, the way it would look if someone had gone through it and pulled it down behind them without latching it. Cross pulled it open and went down the ladder with his sidearm in his right hand, moving as quietly as a man who hadn't slept in 20 hours could move. The corridor was dark, except for the thin emergency lighting that ran along the baseboard's Drix boards, orange-yellow strips that gave enough light to see shapes and nothing more. It smelled like concrete, dust, and old insulation, and something metallic that might have been the pipework. It was maybe 5 feet high, which meant Cross had to move in a crouch that burned his thighs immediately. He stopped at the base of the ladder and listened. 20 meters ahead, maybe less. The sound of someone moving, not rushing, careful. Then a different sound thing, scraping against the wall, the kind of involuntary noise a person makes when they're trying not to make noise, and they're trying not to make noise, and their shoulder catches something. 2 people, the shooter and Mara trying to create distance. Cross moved forward in the crouch and hated every second of it, because his movement wasn't quiet and his knees were bad on the left side from an old injury and the corridor offered nowhere to go sideways if the shooter turned around. He was committed to a straight line in a space with no cover, and his only advantage was that the shooter's attention was presumably forward. He covered 10 meters. Then a muffled crack, suppressed, close, and the sound of something hitting the wall. Cross stopped breathing. Nothing followed it. No second shot. No sound of a body dropping. Cross. Her voice from somewhere ahead. Low and controlled. I'm okay. He missed. Where is he? He went left at the junction. There's a branch that goes toward the motor pool access. Cross hadn't known there was a junction. He filed that away and moved forward again until he reached the tinner section she'd described, a narrow branch going left that angled toward the north side of the bases. He held at the corner and listened. Footsteps. Moving away, fast now, with a careful, quiet abandon. He's running, Mara said from behind him, and Cross turned to find her 3 meters back, pressed against the wall, the pistol she'd pulled from somewhere held low. The field dressing on her side was darkening. At one corner, the movement had opened something. You're bleeding again. Later. She pointed left. He goes that way. There's an access hatch into the motor pool yard. If he gets into the vehicle, pool was already on his radio. Backup frequency, Reyes's channel. Reyes. Motor pool yard, north access hatch. Armed individual, coming up hot. Do not engage without confirmation. Repeat, do not engage. Without a burst of sound came through the radio. Not words. The sound of a hatch opening. Boots on metal. Shouting. Then Reyes's voice, tight. We have him, sir. He's down. He's a pause. It's Corporal Devlin, sir. Cross and Mara looked at each other in the dim orange light of the maintenance corridor. Devlin, 22 years old. Vale's section, administrative staff. He had been at Blackridge for 7 months. They brought Devlin to the command post with his hands zip-tied behind him and a split lip from where he'd hit the motor pool yard hard when Reyes's team put him down. He was young, younger looking than 22, with the kind of face that still had something unfinished in it, and he was scared in the way that people get scared when they've done something they can't undo, and they've just figured out that the window for walking it back has closed. He didn't say anything for the first 10 minutes. He sat in the chair with his wrists behind him and looked at the floor and breathed too fast. Mara sat across the table from him. She had a fresh field dressing on her side, and she had cleaned the dirt from the corridor off her hands and face with the focused efficiency of someone checking items off a list. She set the rifle that Reyes's team had recovered on the table between her and Devlin and left it there without commenting on it. Cross stood by the wall. Devlin, he says. The young man looked up. His eyes went to Cross, then to Mara, then away from Mara, with the specific difficulty of someone who can't look at the person they just tried to kill. I want a lawyer, Devlin said. You're not under civilian jurisdiction, Cross said. You're under the Uniform Code. You know that. I want... Who sent you into that corridor? Mara said. Devlin's jaw set. He looked at the table. I'm not... Corporal. Her voice was quiet and direct and had no performance in it. I've been doing this for 15 years. I know what a volunteer looks like, and I know what someone following an order looks like. You look like the second one, which means whoever gave you that order is sitting in a climate-controlled building right now, and you're sitting in this chair. She paused. Help yourself. Devlin's breathing was still too fast. His eyes moved to the rifle on the table and away. He said you were going to get people killed, Devlin said finally. He said you were the leak, that you'd been feeding our positions to the enemy, and he had proof, and he couldn't go through official channels because Cross was protecting you. The room was quiet. Cross felt something cold move through his chest. He told you I was the leak, Mara said. No inflection. Just repeating it back. He showed me transmissions. Said they traced to your position. Who showed you? Devlin's mouth was tight. He looked at the floor again. I'm not going to ask a third time, Cross said. A long pause. The kind that happens when someone is weighing two bad options and can't find a third. Colonel Vale, Devlin said. Vale was in the intelligence section building when Cross came for him, this time with Holt and 2 members of the base security detail. It was 04:30 in the morning, and the base was in the gray, exhausted quiet that follows a long night, and Vale was at his desk, with his jacket on, and his notepad in front of him, and the look of a man who had been waiting. Captain Cross, he said, I've been expecting a misunderstanding. Stand up, please, Colonel. Vale's eyes moved to Holt, then to the security detail, then back to Cross. Something very controlled and very deliberate moved through his expression. This is irregular, he said. Stand up. Vale stood. He did it slowly, of someone with the dignity who intends to dispute every part of what is happening and wants his body language on record as having done so. He was tall. Cross was always struck by how tall he was, how much of the room he occupied standing up. You're making a significant mistake, Vale said. Devlin is in the command post. A pause. The first pause that wasn't controlled. Just a fraction of a second, but it was there. Devlin is a troubled young soldier, 17, who has been under considerable stress. He told us what you told him. He also told us how you recruited him. He's been talking for the past 20 minutes, and he has a very good memory for details. Cross kept his voice level. Hands where I can see them, please. Vale looked at him for a long moment. The professional neutrality had not left his face, but something behind it had shifted, not fear exactly. Something harder and colder than fear. The expression of someone who has run the calculation and found that one set of options has closed. I want this on record, Vale said. I'm cooperating under protest, and I am instructing you to contact General Harmon's office before you take any further action. Noted, Cross said. Hands. Vale put his hands forward, and Cross zip-tied them with a precision that was professional and impersonal, and that Vale bore without visible reaction. Psychologically, they walked him out of the intelligence section, building into the pre-dawn gray, past the duty analyst who stood up from his chair and then didn't know what to do with himself, out into the compound where the perimeter lights were still on, and a handful of Marines on watch saw a full colonel being escorted by the base commander and went very carefully back to looking at their sectors. The formal interrogation happened in Cross's office with a recording device running and Holt present as witness. Vale had stopped talking on the walk across the compound and didn't start again when they sat him down. He looked at the recorder, looked at Cross, and said he was waiting for legal representation. Cross set the transmission log on the desk, then the building access log, then the photograph of the jammer in place on the fuel depot wall, then a printed copy of the frequency analysis Mara had done on the signal intercepts, with the corroborating location data from the building sensors. Vale looked at each document as it appeared. His expression gave nothing. You sent 2 transmissions in the 48 hours before last night's assault, Cross said. Both on a non-standard frequency, not allocated to this base's communication system. Both corresponding within minutes to your exits from the intelligence section building via the side emergency door. He tapped the access log. The transmissions were received by the attacking force, consistent with the timing of their operational preparation. Your personal device was the source. Vale's hands were in his lap. He looked at the documents. I'd like to speak with General Harmon, he said. You will, after we've finished. Cross leaned forward. 5 years ago, an operation called Silver Wolf was compromised. 12 operators went into a target area with full operational security, and the enemy was waiting for them. 11 people died. The operation's failure was attributed to command error, specifically errors by the team leader, who was conveniently dead and unable to respond. The file was closed. The families were told a story that wasn't true. Vale's hands shifted slightly in his lap. I don't know what you're referring to, he said. Mara walked into the office. She had not been announced. Cross had not told Vale she would be coming. She came in through the door without rushing, walked to the far side of the room, and stood against the wall with her hands at her sides. She looked at Vale with the same settled gray eyes that had been watching the Ridgeline since she arrived, and she didn't say anything. Vale looked at her. Something happened in his face that was the most genuine expression. Cross had seen from a contraction, brief and involuntary, the reflex of a man who has been certain about something for 5 years and is suddenly less certain. Hello, Colonel, Mara said. Vale said nothing. Silver Wolf, she said. Operation date, November 14, 5 years ago. Insertion point, Northern Grid reference 774. Team composition, 12 operators, one team leader, call sign Granite. She paused. You were the intelligence officer who provided the operational package. The insertion route, the target location, the communication frequencies, all of it. That operation was classified. You compromised it, she said. You gave the insertion route to the other side. You gave the frequencies. You gave the timing. You gave everything. And 11 people died in the first valley because the enemy was sitting in position waiting for them, and we walked right into it. Her voice was even and quiet, and the steadiness of it was something she was holding deliberately. Cross could see that it cost her something to keep it that way, and she was paying the cost. Known it was you for 4 years. I've been trying to build something solid enough to matter for 4 years. Vale's jaw was set. His eyes had gone somewhere cold and distant. Speculation, he said. Everything you've described is circumstantial. The transmissions aren't. Those will be disputed. They'll be decoded, Mara said. I sent the raw signal data out 2 days ago. Off base to a signal specialist who has no connection to this base or your section. The decryption is already happening. Whatever you sent to that attacking force is going to be in plain language within the next 12 hours. The quiet in the room was absolute. Vale looked at her. Cross watched him run the calculation in real time. The transmission, data, the building sensor logs. Devlin in the command post talking, the decryption running somewhere he couldn't reach. He watched Vale understand that the architecture he'd been maintaining for 5 years had reached its limit. You survived, Vale said. It wasn't a question. It came out with a complexity that was difficult to categorize, something between disbelief and something darker. I did, Mara said. You were supposed to... I know what I was supposed to do. A pause. I didn't cooperate. Vale looked at his hands in his lap. A long look like he was reading something written there. I want legal representation, he said quietly. You'll get it, Cross said. In the meantime, you're going to sit here, and you're going to tell me who else is involved. Because Devlin is 22 years old, and scared, and talking, and whatever version of this that comes out is going to look very different, depending on how cooperative you are in the next hour. Vale was silent. The families, Mara said. Garrett Webb's family. The other 10. They were told he died because of his own mistakes. I want that corrected. Vale looked at her. A long look that wasn't hostile exactly, but wasn't anything warmer than that. Something behind it was calculating, weighing, measuring how much was already lost against how much could still be managed. Webb was a good officer, Vale said finally. It came out differently from everything else he'd said, less controlled, like it had escaped from somewhere he'd been keeping it. I want that on record. He was good, then Mara said. Vale looked away. He didn't answer. By 0600, Vale was in secured custody in the base detention facility, and Cross was on a secure line to General Harmon's office, trying to explain, as concisely as possible, what had happened in the past 72 hours at Fort Blackridge. Harmon was in his early 60s, built like someone who had been large and athletic and had channeled all of it into his voice over the years, and his voice through the secure line was careful and precise in the way that senior officers' voices got when they were processing something that had implications they needed time to assess. You arrested a full colonel, Harmon said. Yes, sir. On your own authority. Operational security emergency, sir. Ongoing threat to the base. I didn't have time to run it up. A pause on the line. Walk me through the evidence. Cross walked him through it. The transmissions. The building access log. The jammer. Devlin. The corroborating signal analysis. He was methodical, and he kept his voice even, and he did not editorialize. Facts, timeline, documented evidence, names. Harmon was quiet for a moment when Cross finished. Who's Voss, he said. Cross had been waiting for that question. She's a sniper assigned to this base, sir. She identified the communication anomaly and collected the initial signal evidence. Her file. It's thin, sir. She came to us on a reassignment order. She's been effective. Thin. Harmon said the word with a specific weight that suggested he knew what thin meant. Cross. Who sent her to your base? The order came through standard channels, sir. I don't know who initiated it. A longer pause. I'm going to need to have a separate conversation with her, Harmon said. Understood, sir. In the meantime, Vale stays in detention. I'm sending an IG team and a JAG officer. They'll be there in approximately a pause while he checked something. 18 hours. Copy, sir, and Cross. The Silver Wolf matter. What she said about that operation. Yes, sir. If what she's alleging is accurate, there are people with careers built on the official account of what happened that day. I understand, sir. Do you? Yes, sir. Cross kept his voice level. I understand what it means. I think the families of the people who died deserve an accurate account more than those people deserve protected careers. A very long pause on the line. Get me the decoded transmissions as soon as they're available, Harmon said. And keep your base locked down. If Vale was running information out, the attacking force knows their source is compromised. Now. They may decide to move before we do. Already at elevated posture, sir. Good. A pause. You did the right thing, Captain. I'll have that on record, too. The line went dead. Cross set the handset down and sat in his office for a moment, with his eyes closed. The kind of moment that happens when something big has moved, and the space where it was feels different, and you need a second to orient to the new geography. He found Mara in the medical bay, which was where she had finally gone, when Holt had told her, with the flat certainty of someone who had stopped asking, that she was going whether she wanted to or not. The medic had redressed the wound in her side and started her on antibiotics and told her she needed to rest, which she was technically doing. She was lying on the cot, but she was reading the signal sex intercept data on the tablet, which was a specific kind of rest that the medic had clearly decided not to fight about. Cross sat down in the chair beside the cot. She lowered the tablet. Harmon, she said. IG team and JAG inbound. 18 hours. He paused. He wants to talk to you. She absorbed that. About Silver Wolf. Yes. She set the tablet on the cot beside her and looked at the ceiling. The medical bay was quiet. The other 2 beds were empty, the wounded from the previous night having been moved to the recovery room. Morning light was coming through the narrow window, real light now, the kind that came after a full sunrise, and not before it. Webb's family, she said. I mentioned it. To Harmon. He heard it. He didn't commit to anything. But he heard it. She was quiet. Something moved through her face that was too complex to categorize it, had grief in it, and something older than grief, and something that was the specific expression of a person who has been carrying something alone for a very long time, and has just heard someone else acknowledge its weight. His daughter, she said. Webb's daughter. She was 9 when it happened, which makes her 14 now. A pause. She grew up thinking her father made mistakes that got people killed. Cross didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that would be adequate. I need that corrected, Mara said. Whatever else happens with Vale, whatever the investigation produces. I need that specific thing corrected. I'll push for it. She looked at him. The gray eyes had something different in them. This morning, not softer exactly. Opened, slightly, like something that had been held shut had moved a fraction. You went into that corridor last night, she said. Yes, without backup. Reyes was covering the motor pool exit. That's not backup. That's hoping. She studied his face. Why? Cross thought about the question. It deserved an honest answer. Because you had information I needed, he said, and because you'd been shot at 3 times in 48 hours, and I owed you. She held his eyes for a moment. Then she picked up the tablet again. The decoded transmissions will be in within the next 8 hours, she said. My contact is fast. What are we going to find in them? Coordinates, timing, defensive positions, probably personnel names. Vale would have needed to be specific about who commanded which sector for the mortar team to have had useful targeting data. She paused. And if we're lucky, something that connects back further than Blackridge. Something that goes all the way to 5 years ago. You think it's there? Vale has been doing this for a long time. People who do this for a long time develop habits. They use phrases that recur. They reference operational details the same way across different communications. She scrolled something on the tablet. If he communicated with the people who planned Silver Wolf, which he would have, because he was the one providing intelligence to them, the communication signature will have markers that a signals analyst can match. That's what you need, Cross said, to connect it. That's what I need. Behavioral signature analysis on the encoded traffic. She looked up. It's not a smoking gun, but combined with everything else, it builds a picture that's very hard to dispute. Cross leaned back in the chair. Through the window, he could see the compound. In the morning light, the eastern wall, with its repaired section, the motor pool where Reyes's team was running a vehicle inventory, the intelligence section building with 2 base security personnel now posted at its entrance. After the IG team comes, he said. After the JAG, the investigation, all of it. What happens to you? She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Cross thought she wasn't going to answer. I don't know, she said finally. I've been working toward this for 4 years. I haven't thought very far past it. Your official record. The erasure. If the Silver Wolf matter gets reopens. It gets complicated, she said. There are people with an interest in keeping that file closed. Vale is one, but he's not the only one. She set the tablet down. Harmon mentioned careers built on the official account. He's right. The official account says the operation failed due to field errors. If the real account comes out, it traces back to whoever directed Vale, whoever decided Silver Wolf was expendable, whoever made that call and then buried it under a dead man's name. How high does it go? She turned her head and looked at him with the settled, direct attention she brought to everything. High enough that it took me 4 years to find a base I thought I could use to build the case, she said. And high enough that if I hadn't had someone I could work with when I got here, she stopped. It would have ended differently. Cross felt the weight of that. I found the Silver Wolf file 3 years ago, he said. Someone sent it to me without explanation. I've been carrying it since then. Mara looked at him. I know, she said. He stared at her. You sent it to me, he said. It wasn't a question. She had already confirmed it by not looking away. I needed someone clean, she said. Someone without connections to Vale's network, without a career interest in the official account, with enough seniority to take action, but enough distance from the politics. I researched a lot of people before I decided on you. A pause. And then I needed to get assigned to your base, which explains the reassignment order. Yes, you engineered it. I had help. The person who's decoding the transmissions, she has some access to administrative channels. Cross sat with that for a long moment. The scope of it, the 4 years, the research, the file he'd been carrying for 3 years, without knowing why, the reassignment that had looked routine settled over him in layers. You were running this operation before you got off the truck, he said. Yes, and everyone thought that I was just a reassigned sniper. Yes, something in her expression was not quite an apology, but was aware of its own weight. I needed people to underestimate. I needed to underestimate me. It was the only way to get close enough to build what I needed without Vale seeing it coming. Cross looked at the medical bay ceiling for a moment. The shot on the tower, he said. The first night. The Eastern Ridge scouts. Real, she said immediately. Everything I did at this base was real. Nobody was supposed to get hurt. The evidence was supposed to be enough. A pause. It took longer than I planned. Because Vale moved first. Because Vale recognized me faster than I anticipated and moved first. She turned her head away from him, toward the window. I underestimated how fast he'd decide to act. That's on me. Cross thought about the maintenance corridor, the suppressed rifle. Devlin's scared face in the command post chair. Did you know he'd send someone after you specifically? I knew he would. I didn't know when. You could have told me. If I told you, you would have tried to protect me. And a protection detail would have told Vale that I was expecting an attempt, which would have told him I had more on him than I was showing. She turned back to face him. I needed him to believe he had a window, an actual window. So I was actually exposed. Cross thought about that. He thought about what it meant to deliberately leave yourself exposed, so that the person trying to kill you would commit to trying in a corridor under a building in the middle of the night. And he felt something between professional admiration and something considerably more uncomfortable. That's a significant thing to decide about your own safety, he said. It worked, she said. It very nearly didn't. She met his eyes. For the first time, something in her face acknowledged that a slight change in the set of her mouth, something behind the gray eyes that was less controlled than everything else she showed, fat. I know, she said quietly. They sat in that acknowledgement for a moment, and neither of them said anything further about it, because some things don't need unpacking, and this was one of them. The morning light through the window was getting stronger. Outside, the base was running its morning routines, vehicles, voices, the routine maintenance of a place that had taken hits and was still standing. Cross would have a full day ahead of him. The IG team, the JAG, the post-assault reports, the communication to Vale's section about the change in their chain of command, the 100 operational details that didn't pause, because the night had been difficult. He stood up. Rest, he said. She picked up the tablet. He let it go. He was at the door when her voice stopped him. Cross, he turned. The file, she said. The one I sent you 3 years ago. You kept it. Yes, why? Cross thought about it. The honest answer was that he hadn't been able to explain why at the time and had decided that something he couldn't explain was worth keeping. That wasn't a very military answer, and it wasn't a very rational one, but it was true. It felt unfinished, he said. She looked at him for a moment with those level gray eyes. Then she nodded once and went back to the tablet. Cross walked out into the morning light of Fort Blackridge and went to do his job. And in his jacket pocket, the access log and the jammer photograph sat next to each other in the specific weight of things that were about to change a great deal for a great many people, starting with a 14-year-old girl who had grown up believing something about her father that wasn't true. The decoded transmissions arrived at 14:22, 8 hours after Mara had sent the raw signal data to her contact, and they arrived as a compressed file on a channel that bypassed the base communication infrastructure entirely, a direct transfer to the tablet she'd been working from, routed through 3 relay points that her contact had set up specifically for this purpose. Cross was in the middle of a briefing with the 2-person advanced team that Harmonsen had sent ahead of the main IG group when his radio clicked twice on the backup frequency. The signal they'd agreed on. He excused himself, stepped outside, and went to the medical bay. Masa was sitting up on the cot. The tablet was open, and she had her finger on the screen, scrolling slowly, reading with the careful attention of someone making sure they understand exactly what they have before they say anything about it. She looked up when Cross came in. "It's there," she said. He pulled the chair over and sat. She turned the tablet so he could see it. The decoded transmissions ran to 11 pages. The signals analyst had added a header to each decoded block with the original timestamp, the frequency signature, and a confidence rating on the decryption accuracy. The confidence ratings were all above 92%. The content was in plain text, organized in the terse shorthand of operational communication. The first transmission read like a standard military intelligence brief: grid references, timing windows, defensive position details, patrol rotation schedule. Cross recognized the information immediately. It was Blackridge's operational data. Current enough that it had been accurate at the moment of transmission. The kind of data that only someone inside the base's information architecture could have compiled in that form. The second transmission was shorter. Final confirmation, timing of approach, identification of primary interdiction target. Cross read the identification line twice. The primary interdiction target was listed not by name, but by a physical description: height, build, and a 4-character identifier that meant nothing to him at first. He looked at Mara. She tapped the identifier. "It's a Silver Wolf call sign," she said. "Individual operator call signs. They were assigned at the beginning of the operation 5 years ago and never officially documented outside the classified operational package." She paused. "Only someone with access to that package would know to use them, which ties this transmission directly to Silver Wolf, to the same network, same operational contact. Vale didn't just start selling information recently. He's been in this relationship for 5 years, probably longer. The attacking force at Blackridge isn't a random independent group. They're connected to whoever compromised Silver Wolf." Cross sat with that for a moment. The implication spread outward like a crack moving through glass, not just Vale, not just Blackridge, but a 5-year relationship between a senior intelligence officer and an enemy network that had persisted through multiple postings and multiple operations. And whatever Vale had given them at Silver Wolf had been the beginning of something, not a single event. How many operations did Vale have intelligence oversight on in the past 5 years? Cross said. "I counted 11 significant ones," Mara said. "I've been doing that count for 3 years. I don't have enough information to know which ones were compromised, but now the IG team will have a basis to look." 11. Yes. Cross looked at the ceiling of the medical bay for a moment. 11 operations. The people in those operations who had been wounded or killed because the enemy knew where they were going. The missions that had failed without clean explanations. The careers that had ended when things went wrong in ways nobody could fully account for. "Give me the tablet," he said. She handed it over. He took it to the advanced IG team and spent 40 minutes walking them through the decoded content while they recorded everything and asked questions that were precise and professional and and gave away nothing about what they were thinking. When he was done, the senior investigator, a woman named Major Altcott, who had the manner of someone who had done this work long enough to stop being surprised by it, looked at the decoded transmissions for a long moment and then looked at Cross. "Who else has seen this content?" she said. "Myself, Sergeant Major Holt as witness, and the individual who collected the original signal data. Voss. Yes. She's the one who sent the raw data to the outside analyst. Yes. That's an irregular procedure. It was a compromised communication environment, ma'am. Sending the data through the base system would have risked Vale becoming aware of the analysis before we had results." Alcott looked at him steadily. "That's a reasonable operational judgment," she said, which was not quite the same as saying it was authorized. "I'll need to speak with Voss directly. She's in the medical bay." "I know. I'll go to her." The main IG team arrived at 0800 the following morning. 4 investigators, a JAG officer, and a 2-person signals technical team that immediately took possession of all the communication equipment in the intelligence section building and began their own independent analysis. Vale had spent the night in base detention without speaking, which his JAG representative had presumably advised. Devlin had spent the night in a separate, secured room and had continued talking not in great volume, but in the specific way that scared young people talk when they understand that cooperation is the only card they have left. What Devlin provided was not the core of the case. The core of the case was the transmissions, the building access log, the jammer, and the decoded content. What Devlin provided was texture the recruitment process, the framing Vale had used, the specific things Vale had said about Mara when he handed Devlin the suppressed rifle and told him what needed to happen. That texture mattered because it documented the murder attempt in Vale's own, described words as related by a witness who had been present for the conversation. The JAG officer, a captain named Rel, sat with Cross for 3 hours on the morning the main team arrived, going through every piece of evidence in the sequence it had been collected, verifying the chain of custody, asking the same questions from different angles in the methodical way of someone building something that needs to hold weight. At the end of it, Rel closed his notebook and looked at Cross. The Silver Wolf matter, he said. The original investigation. Yes, that's going to require a separate proceeding. What's here is sufficient to initiate, but the scope of what you're describing, the deliberate compromise, the falsification of the after-action record, that's not something I can address in the context of this investigation. I understand that, Cross said. What I need to know is whether it will be addressed at all. Rel was quiet. For a moment, he was young for a JAG officer, maybe 30, with careful eyes and the manner of someone who had learned that precise language was a form of protection. General Harmond has been briefed on the Silver Wolf element, Rel said. The decision about whether to initiate a formal review is above my authority. What I can tell you is that the decoded transmissions provide a documented connection between Val's current meets pool and a network that has been operational for at least 5 years, and that connection will be in my report. And the families, the notification process. A 14-year-old girl, Cross said, who thinks her father died because of his own mistakes. I need to know that gets corrected. Rel held his eyes for a moment. That's a command-level decision, he said, but it will be documented in my report as a specific and unresolved harm requiring action. He paused. That's what I can commit to. It wasn't everything. Cross had known it wouldn't be everything. He nodded and let it go, because pushing Rel past what he could commit to wouldn't produce a better outcome and might produce a worse one. Alcott's conversation with Mara lasted 2 hours. Cross was not present for it. He found out afterward from Mara what had been covered her background. Silver Wolf, the 4 years of independent work, the engineering of the Blackridge assignment, the signal evidence. All of it in the sequence it had happened, documented by Alcott's recorder and Alcott's careful questions. What Alcott had said at the end of the interview, Mara relayed to Cross without particular emphasis. Standing in the doorway of the medical bay with one arm crossed over her injured side in the posture she'd adopted when the wound was bothering her more than she intended to show. She said, the record erasure will be reviewed at the broader investigation, Mara said. She couldn't say what that means specifically. How did you read it? I read it as a person telling me something true while being careful not to promise more than she could deliver. A pause. She's good at her job. Does that feel like enough? Mara looked at the compound through the medical bay door. The afternoon light was long and low, the desert heat settling into the particular amber quality that came in the hours before sunset. 2 of the IG team's investigators were crossing the compound toward the intelligence section building with Evanson's collection equipment. It feels like a start, she said, which is more than I had 3 days ago. Cross thought about the 4 years she'd described. The patient, methodical work of building something that could hold up. The file she'd sent him, the reassignment she'd engineered. The night in the maintenance corridor, deliberately exposed. When the investigation is complete, he said, what do you want to happen? She looked at him. Webb's record corrected, she said. All 11 of them, but Webb specifically, because he was named in the after action as the failure point. The families notified. Vale charged, fully charged, not managed into quiet retirement. She paused. And the network he was connected to, identified and dismantled, because Vale is not the whole thing. He's a piece. And you personally, what do you want? She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the investigators had reached the intelligence section building, and one of them was unlocking the door. I don't know yet, she said. I've been working toward this for so long that I haven't been very good at thinking past it. She looked at her hand, the one with the black wolf tattoo on the wrist, the mark she'd been carrying since before Fort Blackridge, since before the 4 years of work, since the valley where 11 people had died, and she hadn't. I'll figure it out. That's not an answer. No, she agreed. It's not. Vale's formal charges were filed 11 days after his arrest. in a proceeding that was not public but was documented in full by the JAG office and transmitted to General Harmon's command. The charges included unauthorized disclosure of classified operational information, conspiracy to commit acts against military personnel, and conduct unbecoming. The Signals technical team's independent analysis of the recovered communication data confirmed the decoded transmissions, same encryption signature, same behavioral pattern in the message construction, the same operational shorthand that Mara's contact had identified as matching the Silver Wolf communication record. It was not a quick process. Cross had known it wouldn't be. These things moved at the speed of institutions, which was its own specific kind of slow, and the weight of what Vale represented a senior officer with connections, with people whose careers had been built on accounts he'd helped shape, meant that every step was contested by his legal representation and required documentation that was thorough past the point of tedium. But it moved. Cross received word of the Silver Wolf Review's initiation 22 days after the IG team's arrival at Blackridge. It came in a message from Harmon's office formal language, precise scope, the names of the reviewing officers. Buried in the middle of the third paragraph was a single sentence that Cross read 3 times before he was certain he'd read it correctly. The existing after-act documentation attributing operational failure to field command error has been suspended pending review, and the designation will not appear in official records during the review period. He printed the message, walked to the medical bay, and handed it to Mara without saying anything. She read it. She read it twice, as she did with things she wanted to be sure about. Then she set it down on the cot beside her and sat very still for a moment. The wound in her side was healing. The medic had declared it clean 3 days earlier, though she still held herself with a slight adjustment when she'd been sitting for a long time. Outside the narrow window, the desert was doing what the desert did in the late afternoon, the light going sideways and golden and making the ridgeline look like something from a different world than the base beneath it. Garrett Webb, she said. The designation's suspension covers all 11, Cross said. Webb is first on the list. She nodded once. Something in her face shifted not dramatically, not in the way of someone releasing something all at once. More like a pressure that had been constant for so long she'd stopped noticing. It had moved slightly, had given a fraction. And the difference was perceptible only because something that had always been there was slightly less. His daughter, she said. The family notification is part of the review process. It's in the scope. She looked at the printed message again. She's 14, Mara said quietly. She's going to find out her father was a good officer who was set up and died anyway. A pause. That's not a simple thing to hand someone. No, Cross said. It isn't, but it's better than what she had. Yes, Cross said. It's better than what she had. The decision about Mara's own record came 6 weeks after that, and it came in a form that nobody, including Mara, had precisely anticipated. The review of the record erasure determined that the administrative removal of her identity from active files had been conducted without proper authorization and had been initiated from within Vale's section, documented back to a specific action taken 2 weeks after Silver Wolf. The implication of that documentation was clear and was stated plainly in the review findings. The erasure had been deliberate, targeted, and connected to the effort to ensure that the sole survivor of Silver Wolf could not surface to contradict the official account. The review recommended restoration of full record, reinstatement of rank, she had been a staff sergeant at the time of erasure, and formal acknowledgement of her service, including the Silver Wolf operation, with the after-action designation corrected to reflect that the operational failure had resulted in intelligence compromise at the source rather than field command error. Harmon called Cross the morning the review findings were transmitted. The call was brief. Voss, Harmon said. What does she want? I'll ask her, sir. Ask her today. I have a meeting about her file tomorrow morning, and I'd like to know going in. Cross went to the East Tower because That was where she was. It had been 6 weeks since the IG team arrived, and the base had settled back into something approaching normal operations, and Mara had settled back into the routine of Fort Blackridge in the specific way of someone who had finished the thing they came to do and was still figuring out what came next. She ran her watch rotations. She trained 2 of the younger Marines on long-range observation, which she had started doing in the 3rd week without being asked. She went to the East Tower in the late afternoons and watched the ridgeline. Cross climbed up and sat across from her and told her what the review had found and what Harmond had asked. She listened without interrupting, which she always did. When he was done, she was quiet for a long time. The desert below the tower was going through its evening transition, the heat of the day releasing. The shadows from the western ridgeline stretching long across the valley floor, the first suggestion of the cold that would come later. "He's asking what I want," she said. "Yes." "Not what they've decided." "What I want." "Yes." She turned the question over. Cross could see it in her face, the same processing mode he'd learned to recognize, but slower than usual, more interior, working through something that didn't have a tactical solution. "I don't want reinstatement," she said finally. Cross waited. Not to active operations, not back into the field in that capacity. She looked at the rifle case leaning against the tower wall, the old bolt action with the worn stock and the custom optics. "I'm good at what I do. I know that. But I've been doing it alone for a long time, and it costs something. Doing it alone, and I'm not sure I have as much of that particular resource left as I used to." Then what? She looked at the 2 Marines she'd been training, who were running a range exercise below the tower, working through observation techniques with the patient imprecision of people who were still learning. She had been working with them for 3 weeks, and in that time their practical accuracy had improved measurably. Cross had seen the range scores. "The training," she said. "What I've been doing with those 2. I want to do that. Not here specifically at a proper facility, with a program, with enough time to actually build something, rather than patch what exists." She paused. "There are young people going into the field without the skills they need to come back out. That's not a funding problem. It's a knowledge transfer problem. People who know how to do this don't always know how to teach it, and the people who know how to teach it often haven't done it for real." She looked at her hands. "I've done it for real, and apparently I can teach it based on 3 weeks of evidence." "That's what you want me to tell Harmond? Tell him I want a posting at the Advanced Marksmanship and Observation School. Instructor track. Full curriculum authority over the long-range observation program." She paused. "And I want it on record, the whole record, my name, my service, Silver Wolf, all of it, because I'm not interested in being a ghost anymore. I've been a ghost for 4 years, and it's a miserable way to operate." Cross looked at her. Something in her face had settled in the past 6 weeks, not softer, but different. The constant readiness that had been in every line of her body when she stepped off the supply truck, the supplytly,
Facility,
made room for something else. Not relaxation, exactly. More like the specific quality of a person who has put down something heavy and is still adjusting to the changed weight of their own hands. "I'll tell him," Cross said. "Tell him I also need the rifle. The school is already equipped. Not with this rifle." She looked at the case. "This one goes where I go." Cross almost smiled. He managed not to. Harmond approved the posting 12 days later. The paperwork took another 3 weeks, which was faster than Cross had expected, and which Harmond had apparently pushed from his end, because there were people who would have been content to let it sit in a review queue for 6 months, and Harmond had not allowed that. The day Mara's orders came through, Cross found her at the firing range, running a precision exercise with 4 Marines who had apparently decided to attend voluntarily on their own time without being required to. She had set up a target sequence at 800 meters moving targets, offset distances, the kind of exercise that most psych resource reserved for advanced students, and she was walking them through it with the patient iterative methodology of someone who had figured out that the way to transfer a skill was to break it into pieces small enough to succeed at and let the success do the teaching. He stood at the edge of the range and watched for a few minutes before she noticed him. When she did, she called a pause on the exercise and walked over. She was wearing the same faded fatigues she'd arrived in, which the supply sergeant had tried to replace twice, and she had declined twice, and the black wolf tattoo was visible on her wrist in the afternoon light. He handed her the orders. She read them. Read them again. Instructor track, she said. Full curriculum authority. Long-range observation and field marksmanship. He paused. They want you there in 6 weeks. She looked at the orders for a moment longer, then folded them and put them in her jacket pocket. Behind her, one of the Marines called out, Sergeant Voss. We setting up the second sequence? She looked back at them. 4 people who had come to the range on their own time, because something she'd done in 3 weeks had made them want to be better at a thing that would keep them alive. Give me 2 minutes, she said. She turned back to Cross. 6 weeks, she said. Yes, that's enough time to finish what I've started with those 4. It is. She looked at him with the gray eyes that gave away less than most people's did, but had given away, over the past several weeks, considerably more than they had on the first day. There was something in them now that acknowledged a shared weight, not warmly, not in the effusive way of people who perform their feelings, but in the direct and specific way of 2 people who have been through something hard together and know it. Cross, she said, yes, thank you. She said it plainly, without decoration. 2 words that meant exactly what they said, and nothing more and nothing less. He nodded once. She turned and walked back to the 4 Marines waiting at the firing line, and Cross heard her voice shift back into the patient instructional register she used on the range, clear, specific, asking one of them to adjust their position, pointing at something about the way the 2nd Marine was reading the wind, moving along the line with the particular focus of someone doing the thing they are supposed to be doing. Vale's court-martial was held 41 days after his arrest at a facility 300 miles from Blackridge. Cross attended as a primary witness. Mara was also called. She testified for 2 hours and 20 minutes, answering questions in the same, even, factual register she brought to everything, and the decoded transmissions, and the building, sensor logs, and the jammer photograph, and Devlin's testimony, built the case in layers that the defense contested at every point and could not dismantle at any of them. The verdict came on the 3rd day. Guilty on all charges. Vale received a sentence that meant he would not hold another position of authority in any context, military or otherwise, and the documentation of what he had done was placed in a permanent record that could not be sealed or reclassified. His name was attached to the compromise of Silver Wolf in every document going forward. Garrett Webb's name was attached to nothing except his actual service record, which was corrected and reissued with the after-action designation removed and replaced a citation that described accurately what had happened in the valley and what Webb had done in the minutes before he died. Cross was standing outside the courthouse when Mara came out after the verdict. She stood beside him on the courthouse steps. For a moment in the winter light they were in a city, and it was cold in a different way than Blackridge, damp and urban, traffic sounds in the background. Webb's family was notified yesterday, she said. I know. Harmon told me. His daughter, she stopped. Started again. She's 14. She grew up thinking she didn't finish it. She didn't need to. I don't know what you say to someone to undo 5 years of something like that. You probably can't undo it, Cross said. You can only give them what's true and let them do something with it. Mara looked at the street. A car passed. Someone was walking a dog on the opposite sidewalk with the unhurried patience of a weekday afternoon. She wrote a letter, Mara said, Webb's daughter, to the review board. I wasn't supposed to see it, but someone forwarded it to me anyway. A pause. She said she wanted people to know that her father wasn't the kind of person who made those kinds of mistakes. that she knew that about him, even when the records said otherwise. She paused again. She was right. Cross didn't say anything. Sometimes the right response to something was to let it be what it was without adding to it. After a moment, Mara straightened up and put her hands in her jacket pockets, both of them, which meant the wound in her something side had healed past the point of guarding. "I leave for the school in 10 days, she said. "I know. Fort Hessel, northern Nevada, so at least the desert will be familiar. You'll hate the coffee there, too." Something shifted in her face, not quite a smile, but the precursor to one, the configuration of a person who has decided that something is actually slightly funny. "I brought Reyes's French press," she said. "He didn't know I took it. Don't tell him." This time Cross did smile. They stood on the courthouse steps a little longer, in the winter cold of a city that had nothing to do with either of them, and then they shook hands once, firm, brief, and went their separate ways. Fort Hessel's long-range observation program had graduated 47 students in the 4 years before Mara Voss arrived as its new lead instructor. In the 4 years after she arrived, it graduated 212. The curriculum she rewrote in her first year incorporated elements that had not previously been taught in any formal military instruction field: signal analysis, unauthorized communication detection, the specific tactical awareness that comes from learning to read a position the way a threat would read it. The students who went through her program came back from deployments at a rate that the school's administrators noticed and couldn't fully account for until they started looking at what, specifically, Mara's curriculum had added and what skills her graduates were demonstrating in the field that previous graduates hadn't. Cross heard about it from Harmon's office 2 years after the court-martial, in a brief mention during an unrelated communication, the kind of thing that gets noted in passing because it has become unremarkable, which is its own kind of evidence of how thoroughly something has worked. She still had the old rifle. He knew that because she sent him a photograph of it once, leaning against a wall at Fort Hessel's firing range with a target downrange and a group of students visible in the background at various stages of a precision sequence she'd set up. The rifle looked exactly the same as it had at Blackridge worn stock, custom optics thoroughly used. Probably it always would. The photograph had nothing written on the back. It didn't need to. He put it in his desk drawer next to the Silver Wolf file that he'd carried for 3 years, waiting to understand why he couldn't put it down. And he left both of them there as a reminder of the specific and uncomplicated truth that some things that feel finished are only finished because someone refused to let them stay buried, and that the refusal, difficult and costly and imperfect as it always is the thing that makes the difference between a story that ends in silence and one that ends in something worth keeping. The woman they once laughed at became the reason 200 people came home. Not because she was perfect, because she was still standing when it mattered. And she chose to use that for something other than herself. The strongest people. They're the ones who never break. They're the ones who survive the breaking and then turn around and hold the door open for whoever is still coming through.